All to do with what is so vitally needed in our region, which is food security and food sovereignty. And we are very grateful to have a very distinguished speaker with us today, Dr. Warren Bell, a doctor who's been in the Shuswap for a long, long time, and he is one of the doctors who actually studied nutrition and recognizes how nutrition plays a role in health. Go figure. And so he today, though, with everything he's done, and I'm not even going to list it all because it's a long list, he is going to be speaking about food security, food sovereignty, what is the difference, why do we need it, and how perhaps we can get there. So he has a presentation here, and I'm going to give it to you. Oh, and he also is the host of the Shuswap Food Conversations, which is on the Voice of the Shuswap radio station here in the Shuswap at 93.7 FM, CKBS. He's been doing it now for 2 years, and we have a long list of additional presentations that are on the radio station's website now under podcasts for Dr. Warren Bell for Food Conversations, where we can learn and listen to even more speakers than we've even had here this weekend coming up. So thank you. Awesome.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Melanie is the hardworking secretary of Shuswap Food Action Society and has had a great role in organizing this display and all the other things going on today with respect to this series, which is new. It's a series sponsored by Buckerfield it's called Urban Agriculture, but it's on food and where we get it from and what we do with it and how we find it, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about food sovereignty, but not in a direct sense, this is how we have food sovereignty. I'll get to that at the end. But what I'm going to do is put a little bit of a historical overtone to what we do today to show that we got where we are now, which is a big mess, quite honestly. And it took literally thousands of years, even hundreds of thousands of years, and we've gone off track, and we have to get back on track. So you'll see that when I start the presentation. So we're going to talk about how we got here, because we have a long and winding road to get us into the mess we're in now. So this is our dizzying road. Our ancestors were all foragers. They went out into the wild and they hunted around for whatever was available. And this is going back from 2 million years right up to about 10,000 BC. That's all we did, we foraged. We went out in the woods and we looked for what was available. And whatever was available we found, and we had to follow Mother Nature's rules all the way down the line. We didn't decide how things would happen. She told us, we obeyed. If we obeyed, we were good. If not, we were in trouble. So how do we normally know about all these ancient peoples that came before us? Well, this is a typical sort of thing, a sort of a skeleton. Here's another one. Here's another skeleton. You see graves, and they don't look like anything. They don't seem like us because we don't see ourselves as skeletons. We see ourselves as living beings. And then people have done paintings like this, which shows our ancestors as kind of primitive, scared, didn't know what they were doing, all looking, oh my goodness, and their faces don't look very intelligent. And yet, that's wrong, because as we've sort of gone along, we painted somewhat different pictures showing that we had some skills, but they're still not like people. They don't look like us. They don't look like living people. However, there's some carryover from the forensic world called facial reconstruction. You take somebody's skeletal remains and you can actually make a person out of them. It takes a great deal of skill, a lot of experience, but I'll show you what I mean. That's one example. You can see by that picture there, that head that's being touched up doesn't have a body attached to it, but it looks very realistic. It looks like a real person. We'll take this one. Now that looks like a real person. That's a young woman in her early 20s from Mexico, a deep well. She drowned, as you can see, 13,500 years ago, but she looks like somebody who could be in this room right now. So you can see she's a real person. Here's another one. This is a man who lived 20,000 years ago, and yet his face has been rebuilt to look just like you and me. And it's very important for us to understand that our ancestors were very much like us, because then we'll understand why we did what we did and why what we're doing now just doesn't fit with the long history of the human race. Here's another face, a young woman 9,000 years ago from Greece. She's 19 years old. Her skeleton was found to be 19 years old. But this picture shows somebody who could be going to high school and just graduated and heading off to university in our world. So the reason I have done this is I want you to see that we have a deep connection to our own species. And what we did as a species for a very long time is what comes naturally to us. And what we're doing now is very different from that. So, we're called hunters-gatherers. And you can see that meant we hunted animals and we gathered plants, all sorts of plants. We had to know a heck of a lot about how Mother Nature worked. We had to be extremely sophisticated in our knowledge, seasonal knowledge, weather knowledge, location knowledge. We had to understand there's this idea somehow is a very simple-minded process. Well, that's rubbish, and we've found that out recently to our great distress. Our ancestors, who were all indigenous, knew a heck of a lot and were very smart. Interestingly, most of the plants we harvested were greater in caloric quantity. 70% of what we ate was from plants, not from hunting. And it's just because hunting is intermittent, but plants grow there all the time. They don't run away when you approach them. Also, it's very important to understand that there was a certain amount of egalitarianism, of equal value attached to men and women, to the elderly. We didn't dismiss people because they weren't out there producing widgets. We valued people because of their knowledge. And we've kind of lost some of that, and that's a terrible loss. And in addition, we survived because we worked together. And there's all sorts of arguments about how humans became so prominent in the world. But the main thing was that we worked as a team. And our ancestors could, a little human about 5'6" couldn't bring down a woolly mammoth, but 25 humans working together from all sides could do so. And that's why we were able to be so successful. And it's that ability to think about things and then organize ourselves into groups and function as a single unit that was our key to being able to survive and in fact become dominant in the world. So, along came a process that some of you may know about, but some of you may not. And it's called something. All I have to do is get my cursor back where it belongs. There we are. It's called the Agricultural Revolution. Now, we think the way we grow food today is normal. But if you look at the whole history of humans on the planet, it's about less than 1% of the time we've been here that we've done things the way we do. So it's important to understand we're living in an anomalous age, a strange age where we've done things quite cleverly in many ways, but very different from all of our ancestors. So, the weather 12,000 years ago happened at different times in different parts of the world, but everybody, for the first time, started to live in a single place, like Salmon. Before that, every home was mobile. You would be there in the summer, you'd move away in the winter, you'd live in some place. If the weather was bad, you'd move off somewhere else. We were always on the move. 10,000 BC, about 12,000 years ago, was when we first started to live in one place and stay there. Now it seems normal to us, but actually in the grand sweep of history, it's very unusual for us to be doing that. And no other animals do that. And we're animals. No other animals stay in one place all the time. Now it had some good points, and the good point was that we made it through the winter much more often than we used to. Because instead of having to run around and, hunt animals or find stuff under the snow, we could have big granaries where grains in particular were stored in large quantities and there was always something to eat. But it's also the time when humans first developed cavities in their teeth, because all that gluten sticking to your teeth made them rot. And if you look at the archaeological record, that's when the dentist first had a job to do. Before that, your teeth just fell out. So we got a reliable food supply, and we also lived in one spot. And these are some of the very useful. This is in Turkey, about 9,000 years BC. this one, oops, the cursor drifts away if I'm not watching it carefully. That's Timbuktu in the middle of Central Africa, 500 AD, BC rather, until 1200. This is Angkor Wat, which is in what's now Cambodia, was built in the 12th century. That's when we all started to do these city things. Before that, we roamed around all the time. So, very interesting commentary coming from the sheep department. So some things happened. Men started to lord it over women. Before that, men and women had different roles, but they had equal power. Most of the time. We stopped being directly dependent on Mother Nature. We could put our granaries away and, hey, we'll just have a nice life through the winter, have parties and things. We started to go to war. Before that, there were skirmishes, occasional engagement, but we kind of kept out of each other's way. Now we started to have war where we tried to exterminate the other people. And that's new. In human behavior, that would never happen before. Finally, we developed classes, kings and queens, aristocrats, middle people. Hold it up. Thank you. Wow, that's excellent. Sorry for the, I got a loud voice. I was thinking of my grandmother who was deaf. So, we developed class systems, the good guys and the bad guys, the strong and the weak. And we were quite comfortable with that because it was a payoff associated with this change in security. So we had these kings, we had armies. These are a bunch of clay soldiers from China from about 400 BC. We had pharaohs, we had leaders in the Muslim community and in Africa. All over the world, we developed these kind of ranked societies with classes. Changed everything. Before, everybody was working together as part of a team. Now, I'm in charge of the team. You go out and do the work. So, who grew the food? Well, it wasn't the kings and queens. It was your average person working in the fields, growing the food, sending it off to the kings and queens to eat. And then went right up to this is the last little pictures from the Middle Ages in Europe, all the way through for these 10,000 years. That's how we developed our system. Some people grow the food, if we're rich and we're powerful, we just eat it and tell them to grow some more. Then we had another revolution that really, really changed things a lot as well. And I'm sure some of you have heard about this one because it's more recent, and if you had a great-great-great-grandfather or mother, he or she could have been living in this time. The Industrial Revolution was when all the machines started to become part of our lives. And they were powered by coal, and then oil, and then gas, and generated electricity, so a lot of machines are powered by electricity. That's what we got, and that changed things dramatically as well because we could do a lot more activity, but there was at the same time we were colonizing. We from a European background were colonizing the whole world, and what was our favorite thing to do? Go to another country, take all their resources, bring it back to Europe, turn it into something, a tool or a device or a machine or a source of food, and enjoy it and say, well, I'm so sorry, those poor starving multitudes elsewhere, that's not here, that's okay, we'll be fine with that. So we kind of developed these massive imbalances between nations and around the world that were all kind of new, but we also had tons of goods. We had, that was when shopping began in the 1800s, people going around and looking at, well, maybe we'll buy that. No, let's get that, we'd like that better. Before that, you had a pair of boots, you kept them until they fell apart. So, we're nearly there. It's just to encourage you to not feel you have to get tired and run away. So, here's the present. The present is radically different from anything that's ever occurred before on this planet. First of all, there's a hell of a lot more of us than there ever were. The population explosion, which has been the title of books, has changed the face of our world beyond recognition. There are now, we're approaching 10 billion. You can't see it there, but that's the number at the top. And it's changed everything because we used to be able to say, well, it didn't work out here, let's go and find a farm or live in a village across the hill. Now there's already somebody there. Everybody is somewhere, and we don't have much room to maneuver. It's also a time when we first started to produce incredible amounts of pollution. Before that, if you threw out an old clay pot, it was just clay. Now it could be plastic. It could be petroleum breakdown products. And it's got into Mother Nature and it's disrupting the natural systems around us upon which we are utterly dependent. And it's getting into our food. And that's where we're finally starting to pay attention to it, because eating food that's contaminated makes us sick, and my profession gets a lot of work from that, but I don't think it's something we should be thrilled about. But this is the kind of stuff that you see. These are just pictures of something that you could find almost on every continent, near factories, near production sites. And the amount of especially plastic pollution is astonishing. That's all new, and it's a result of these changes that have taken place. Seem fairly slow, but they're speeding up. They're getting faster. And as I said, they're getting into our food. So, just to give you one example, we killed off most of the wild animals on this planet. About 100 years ago, 98% of mammals, that is, animals like us, were wild. Now it's 5%. We have decimated means pretty much destroyed. We pretty much destroyed wild populations. They're in National Geographic, documentaries, and some, Mr. Attenborough does a lot of wonderful films of wild ecosystems. But the number of animals that are still around, we've taken over. And we've taken over that scene. These are some of the wild animals that are really endangered. Of course, we played a great role in making the buffalo disappear, because we deliberately killed them off. Rattlesnakes, there's in the Okanagan here, there used to be a rattlesnake population near Vernon. It's completely destroyed. And it's because they had the nerve to bite a person. And that was the end of that. We went after them with a vengeance. Wild turkeys, well, there's for supper, but now we don't have wild turkeys hardly at all. Even the humble dung beetle. Now that people think that's pretty gross. Those are little beetles that take elephant dung and other animals, and they dung their excrement, and they move it around, and it's extraordinary. They take one round poop from an elephant and they spread it over a couple of hectares. They're extraordinarily busy, and if they weren't there, that would just sit in one spot, and the vegetation in that area would not be fed. They're extremely important, but of course we never talk about it. And here in BC, whoopsie daisy, I went too fast. Anyway, I had a picture of a wolf. I'm not going to try and adjust this because I've had problems adjusting this device. It was a wolf, and in BC, we consider it quite reasonable to kill off the wolf population because it's interfering with the animals we like to eat, and the mountain caribou that we don't eat and is now becoming extinct isn't that important to us. So instead of changing the way we do things and having less development that makes it easier for wolves to penetrate into ecosystems, we just kill off the wolves. And that's a very human behavior. Destroy the enemy. These are the kind of animals we have everywhere now. Those purple squares are settling ponds for excrement from a pig farm. Cattle, sheep, goats. These are the animals we prefer, and they have now replaced the large measure of wild populations on this planet. Now we think that's good because we like to eat these animals, and that's okay. There are ways to grow animals, and you'll be hearing about that after this, in a sustainable and regenerative way. But this is not the way to do it. And yet, we've been doing this for a long time. We also farm in different ways. This is not your average Neolithic farmer's dream. This is what we've decided to do. And it means we do large monocultural plantations all over the world. This is palm oil plantations in Malaysia, which have completely replaced large areas of rainforest, as we have replaced large areas of forest in this part of the world. Rice growing in the Far East, and that went away very quickly. It was there for a second anyway. So we've got industrial farming methods, and in order to make them work properly, because they're not exactly natural, you have to use a lot of chemicals. Well, what happens to chemicals? They get into our food. Glyphosate which is the active ingredient in Roundup, is in every grain, pretty much. Even the ones where it says non-GMO, that little insignia, you're eating a lot of glyphosate when you eat wheat, barley, soy, and lentils and other grains, because they're sprayed just before they're harvested. And we spray with great enthusiasm. So, food travels all over the planet, and much of it comes from countries that are much less secure and well-off than we are, where workers are much less secure and well-off than our workers, and that's cheap labor that makes the product, the crop, inexpensive, and it comes to us. And that has created a strange situation. But this is the scenario. Food is carried in shipping containers all over the planet. In trucks, I thought I'd put that one in because we have 2 Timmys in town. We also have McDonald's. That bottom right is a refrigerated container. So it's one of those big boxes, but they've got a refrigeration unit. So you can take vegetables and fruit from Thailand and ship it all the way here. But in order to do that, what do? You burn a lot of fossil fuel. And when you burn a lot of fossil fuel, you contribute to climate change. And what's one of our biggest problems right now? It's a heating planet. Now, the planet is heated before, but is never heated so quickly. Like in 2 generations, the temperature's gone like that. That's what's different about it. It's going so quickly, there's no time for most creatures, and including us, to adapt successfully. We're having to really declare an emergency, which we need to do. It's also led us to a position we're in now where there's a huge imbalance in food availability around the world. There's something like this going on. I mean, the biggest steak you could possibly imagine in this place, big Texan, and this. In other parts of the world, children are dying of hunger. That's an intolerable situation, and it's developed because of how we've kind of progressed without sort of thinking about it a lot, but it just sort of seemed to come naturally. So, when food travels a long distance, and I put the average down for Canada, just under 5,000 kilometers, the average distance that food travels in Canada from its source to the table where it's eaten. And that distance means a lot of fossil fuels. And when that happens, we get global warming. And when we get global warming, we get extreme weather events. Now, I don't have to tell anybody in this part of the world what an extreme weather event is like. We had the heat dome and we had the floods last November. And this was what they did. They took out highways north-south, and all the food stopped coming in. And when the food stopped coming in, and it also flooded the Fraser Valley, incredibly. So many of the places where food was grown were underwater. And this is what happened in Salmon. These are pictures taken in November of a local grocery store and its shelves the day after the atmosphere of the river that dumped so much water. So, we're now going to go to what we have to do to fix it, and by the way, this is the future. It's already coming upon us. We're already starting to understand that we've made some big mistakes and we have to correct them. And I do this show on the radio called Food Conversations, and I can tell you, I see a lot of young people growing food in a totally new way, which is actually going way back to the way we always were. Local, without a lot of chemicals. You get to know your neighbors, you get to serve food to your neighbors and all that kind of stuff. It's starting to happen, and it will happen more and more because that is our future. So, let's just lay out where the future will be if we're going to make it. First of all, local. There's no question, but the biggest single way to reduce excess greenhouse gas production and give people good quality food is to produce it locally and consume it locally. Secondly, he said, with his cursor wandering wildly, organic. Now, organic is a broad term, but basically it says keep all the stuff out of food that doesn't belong there. that includes various pesticides, it includes fossil fuels, it includes a whole range of chemicals that we know and love, like flame retardants and detergents and cleaning fluids. All that kind of stuff doesn't belong in our food. So we have to make a point of keeping it out. We don't just make it stay away, we don't just hope it will stay, we have to make it stay away. Because we've grown up in this generation thinking that was normal, and it's just getting out of control. Number 3, we need to process the food locally. I don't know how many of you know it, but milk has to go down to the lower mainland to get certified and then brought back. It's an insane system, especially if the highway isn't working. The idea that that would be a good idea seemed great when there was no worry about the climate and there was no worry about extreme weather events, but that's the past. Now we're in that state. You have to give people who grow food access to the community directly. That's where most farmers can have the best possible profit margin, and they're not paid very well in our food system, but if they can directly sell it, then they will have a way out. But also we have to have our current retail sales system start to sell local food. And some of the stores in town, Brad DeMille was here, he's got 180 local food producers selling through his market, his farm market. 180. That is until they put the highway in and cut them off from the rest of the planet. And that's a whole other story. We have to use regenerative techniques. We have to make the land healthier, restore the soil, make it more resilient, make it more productive. If we don't do that, we're going to do what they did in the Imperial Valley in California. They produced black, gray dust without any soil, without any what they call tilth. We have to make food available for everybody. It's time to get over this acceptance that some people might have to starve while other people are eating too much and getting fat. We just have to stop that. There was a panel this morning at 10 o'clock. If you've been here, you would have heard 5 people saying exactly the same thing. This is absolutely insane. You know, when the first indigenous people went to Europe, they didn't go voluntarily from this part of the world. They were taken as captives for display. And one of the first comments they made was they saw rich palaces and people begging for food in the street in front of these rich palaces. And they said, "What's wrong with you people? Don't you include them in your community?" And people said, "Oh, well, that's just the way things are." Because the imbalances in the 17 and 1800s were already so well established, we thought they were normal. They're not normal. They're horrible. And we should not tolerate them. I think every one of us should do a little gardening. Get your hands in the soil. Once you do some gardening, you get to understand what it's like for somebody to do it for a living. It's a lot of work, a lot of focus, a lot of attention, a lot of time and thought. And finally, we have to work together. There's no time for people going off in their separate corners, and the farmers grow there and the people eat here, and there's no connection between them. We have to collaborate is Latin. It means work together. And every indigenous person that I've ever spoken to, that's a principle that was operating in their lives from the beginning. Now we also have to, just one warning, we have to make the food we grow, whatever animal or plant food, climate adapted. If we don't do that, we're in big trouble. The provincial government's just starting to get into that, but honestly, if we don't do that, we're really good. I put this down because I think it's something that we have ignored and turned away from for most of the time I've been alive on the planet. We have not recognized that our ancestors way back were all indigenous. We all foraged together. We all lived in small communities. We all had egalitarian social systems. We didn't have this, rich, poor, powerful, weak men, women. We had cooperative and community-oriented relationships. And this is a quote from the the website of the Assembly of First Nations. And I'll just read it quickly. You can just close your eyes. Indigenous peoples are caretakers of Mother Earth and realize and respect her gifts of water, air, and fire, based on a profound spiritual connection to Mother Earth, built on reverence, humility, and reciprocity. Everything is taken and used with the understanding that we take only what we need, and we must use great care and beware of how we take and how much of it, so that future generations will not be put in peril. Now, at one point, you might hear that in a sermon in church. That's a very nice idea. Thank you very much, Reverend, for reminding us of our responsibility. But now it's a survival tactic. If we don't do it, we're going to be hurt. So we've gone from aspirational spiritual ideas to pragmatic spiritual ideas. You don't have to call it religion, just call it thinking big. We all have to start thinking big. And that's me. And I found this wonderful picture of a bio-organic, bio-intensive permaculture farm, and it's in Normandy, in France. This is a universal process that I'm talking about. It applies here, but it applies all over planet Earth. So thank you very much. I don't know if there's time for questions. Where's the boss? Melanie?